Microphones are hot. And we're on camera. All right, so this is the first live stream I've done in probably, I think, about 3 years on the channel. And I am joined by Jesse Frank. He is my assistant to the co-host, or assistant to the host. And I am Micah Pendleton, your host here on Premiere Prep. Thank you guys for joining us, and let's get on into it. This is the first of what will be many live streams going forward, and the intent is to really turn this into kind of like a podcast. You know, I'm somebody who just eats up podcasts and stuff like that, and if I were to describe the style, it honestly would probably be pretty WAN show-esque, like from Linus Tech Tips and all of them, where it's just, you know, sit down and talk about filmmaking, and we'll answer questions and comments, but the conversation will stay pretty general, and then we'll get into some specific specs and stuff like that, but just kind of have a conversation about filmmaking and stuff like that. So, Jesse, why don't you tell the people a little bit about what you do?
Absolutely. Well, I've been making wedding videos for, a long time now, and that's where my expertise is, but I love doing narrative work, commercials, working on a feature film right now, and so we're just going through all that is involved with a feature film, and it's a lot. A lot, I tell you.
How would you describe this feature film? Like what is it? What is it kind of shaped after?
So the best way I could describe it is it's almost like if you took the amnesia memory aspects of the Bourne Identity and then you mixed it with the Matrix, where not necessarily like time, well, it's different in the sense when they go into the Matrix, you know, they're asleep and they have the cables connected to their head. It's a little bit different, but it has aspects of the Matrix in it. So Bourne Identity and the Matrix sort of mashed into this CIA story. That's sort of the best way I could describe it.
Yeah. I've actually got a small role in that movie, which is fun. But also one of the big things I'm doing in that movie is some visual effects. We had to, or you had to actually shoot an entire day without an actress in the scene because schedules couldn't line up. So what I am going to have to do is now take what we shot secondary on green screen and insert her into the scenes, which you had to stand in on location, which helps out a lot to really pull some of that lighting and all that kind of stuff to mimic it after the fact. But it's a really cool project, and we'll definitely be talking about it more on the channel.
Oh yeah.
And hopefully we can get some behind the scenes and stuff like that happening for it as well.
Oh yeah,
and definitely be tuned in.
We got behind the scenes. I want to do a trailer. I want to do, you know, blooper reels, all that sort of stuff.
Yeah,
that'll be cool.
It's a really cool movie, and this guy is really talented and making a great project. So
thank you.
Well, before we get too much further, I mean, a little bit breakdown of the gear that we're using to do this live broadcast. Of course, I've got my Dell Precision M4700. It's an old laptop, but it's still working fine. I'm running Ubuntu 2004 on it. The camera is a Panasonic GH5S. And what lens is that you put on there?
Lumix 12 to 35.
12 to 35. And it is the Lumix.
Yes, it's the branded Lumix lens from Panasonic. It's one of my favorite lenses.
Awesome. And it opens to, what is it, 1.8?
No, 2.8.
2.8. Okay,
Yeah.
That's still pretty good.
Yeah.
Okay, and then the lighting we're using are my GVM 800Ds, which I believe I did a review for in the past. If not, I filmed it and it did not get on air. And then audio, we are using Rode NT-G3s. We got 2 of them here. And I've got a Behringer audio board and my A10 Mini Pro from Blackmagic. So that's pretty much the equipment that we're using here. Very simple stuff, but it's working well so far.
I have an iPad.
And Jesse has an iPad. And I've already got people chiming in that those are some pretty dope glasses you're wearing there.
Well, thank you. I'm going to wear them from here on out. I will never take them off.
Yeah, make sure you guys drop questions and comments into the live chat section, and we will answer them or just discuss whatever it is you guys want to talk about. But we do have some pretty set things we want to talk about here today. Just kind of like what I was saying, we're going to have segments for the show. We have In the News, we have Tech Talk, Woes of the Week, and movie suggestions of the week. So starting off, we do have in the news, and that is the GH5. The GH6 has been announced and released. So you pre-ordered it, correct?
That's correct. I have it on pre-order from B&H. It says that it's coming soon, but I don't know when that is going to happen. I know that a lot of YouTube personalities have already got their hands on a pre-production model, and they've already put their reviews out there online. It's looking like it's going to be an absolutely phenomenal camera.
Some of the stuff I've seen, I have not looked up it. I've not looked into it too much. It's just astounding, the stuff I've seen, because, I mean, I tell you this, I mean, Panasonic has really led the way a lot in mirrorless video.
Oh yeah.
Of course, you know, the GH1, the GH2. I mean, they were good cameras. They were really good cameras, but they weren't really breaking ground. The GH3 had some good improvements. I think is that when they introduced Vlog, or did that come in the GH4?
No, that was the GH4, and
Okay.
it didn't come until a while after, because when the GH4 hit the market, it was basically the first 4K camera that you could get that wasn't. It was, first of all, it was a mirrorless camera, which was also going in a different direction than from Canon, which at that point was dominating the market with like 5D Mark III, for instance. That was a lot of the camera, or the 5D Mark II, as a matter of fact. 5D Mark II arguably was the biggest jump in overall quality and performance over the original 5D.
Right. And I think one of the big things about, you know, Panasonic within the last few generations, because, I mean, the GH5S was pretty random. You know, I mean, they technically could have called that one the GH6 because it was a very different camera from the GH5S.
Well, okay. So
It had a lot of the same internals, but a lot of the individual features were pretty different from what I've seen. Now, you're much more of a Panasonic guy than I am.
Well, okay, so the GH4 was released, I can't remember exactly what year. It seems like it was around 2014 or so. But about a couple years after that, they had the GH5. Big step up from the GH4. Along a little bit later came the GH5S, is what we're shooting on now. Essentially, GH5S is a GH5, but it has no IBIS, no in-body image stabilization, and they greatly improved the ISO performance. Now, Panasonic did release a GH5 Mark II last year. I don't really know why they did that, but I never really looked too much into that camera, because at that point they had already released their full frame line of lens of cameras, which started with the S1, S1H, and then they came up with the S5, which I recently picked up not too long ago, and I've been very impressed with that camera. But with the GH6 coming out, everyone was very, very, very excited about the different advancements and the improvements that they've done to it, and it looks like that they really have outshone themselves this time. Really did a number on a lot of the consumer market, as far as and professional video market.
Yeah. Well, let's go ahead and go down the specs. You got it pulled up on B&H, I believe.
Yeah. So we're looking at a 25.2 megapixel sensor. 4K 60, 422, 10-bit unlimited recording, 5.7K at 60 frames per second.
Wait, at 60?
At 60, yes. 5.7K at 60 frames per second.
Is that 8-bit or 10-bit?
I am not sure. I'm looking here at the B&H site, and it's going over the highlights of the camera. There is a lot of recording formats with this camera. I know there's 8-bit and 10-bit 420, 10-bit 422, and then there's even some more recording options when you go HDMI out to an external recorder. Not exactly what those are exactly yet. From the videos that I've watched, I don't believe that RAW is coming to this camera, but it does have internal ProRes 422 recording.
Internal ProRes?
Yes, internal ProRes.
See, I haven't looked too much into it, but internal ProRes, that's crazy.
Yes. And another big thing that I'm looking forward to is the 4K at 120 frames per second. There's very few cameras outside of, I know the Canon R5 has that feature. I know that the Sony A7S III has that feature as well, but this camera on B&H is listed at basically $2,200. Really undercuts both of those cameras in that aspect. And full HD at 300 frames per second.
Mm-hmm. That's crazy. And I tell you this, I mean, that's an unbelievable deal for the amount of specs that you're getting. I mean, compared to everything else on the market from Canon, from you know, you've got Zcam even, you know, you've got some in the similar price bracket. And truthfully, with internal ProRes, 5.7K, I mean, those HDMI out options and everything, I mean, that's a really good deal for that camera.
Oh, yeah.
But the way I see it is it's still, and this is why I'm probably sticking with what I've got. I shoot on the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera 4K. And the reason why it's still kind of hard for me to swing that is it's like the extra resolution is super nice. But then for me, it's like I've still got internal 4K 60 FPS. In a body that costs $1,300, and I can rig it out to everything. And of course, obviously, you can rig out the GH5 or the GH6. But for me, I'm sticking Blackmagic, but I totally get the appeal of this camera.
Well, you can't beat B-roll.
You can't.
You can't beat B-roll.
Not very easily. I know some people who will argue, a couple of people in particular who argue that B-roll is way overrated. But I tell you this, once I jump into post and I can change my ISO after the fact and my my color temperature and everything with just by typing it in and stuff like that, that workflow is amazing.
Oh yeah.
But I tell you, having ProRes, it's a very high quality format and everything like that. I can see why somebody would want to go with something like the Panasonics. And truthfully, there's a lot of other things. We can get into that more later, but there's a lot of other reasons why I honestly would not even want to go with the Pocket anymore. I would actually want to go with the Panasonic. So that's a conversation for another day, because the Pocket has its own issues, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, next up in the news, the Batman is out, getting into a movie. You saw it. I have not seen it, and I don't know how many people watching have seen it or going to watch this have seen it. So no spoilers. What did you think of it?
I can't say that I've ever actually seen anything like it in a theater, and especially comparing it to the Batman films that have come before it. Notably, everything that Christopher Nolan did with the franchise. Even there's certain aspects of this film that really, it really just has a completely different take on Bruce Wayne and the world of Gotham City and everything like that. I mean, not to mention, I mean, the way it's shot, the lighting, all the cinematography, it's beautiful, but it's very unconventional in many ways. One of the things that I talk about, and like I'm a fan in any movie when they have silhouettes, and there are several very, very interesting ways that they use silhouettes, how they use a lack of light, how they use reflections in glass. There's even a scene, well, actually, no, I'm not going to talk about the scene, even though I want to. I really want to talk about the scene, but I can't. There's just so many things that they did differently, but it's not different in a bad way. It's different in a really good way. And also the fact that this movie, I think it's based in Gotham City, but that Batman has only been around for about 2 years.
Okay.
And that's something that I read about, and it's very interesting because we've never really seen Batman. I mean, Batman Begins went into the origin story, him becoming Batman and everything, but there are certain problems that the city faces that he, in Bruce Wayne's mind, that he believes that he doesn't understand why they're happening.
Sure.
And that brings a really interesting aspect to the movie as well.
It's definitely no spoilers, but
I tried. I'm not good at
it's
that.
really
I want
good.
to talk about it.
I appreciate it. I appreciate it for sure, because I do want to see it, and I'm very curious. The lead actor they got obviously is
Robert Pattinson.
Robert Pattinson.
Twilight.
Yeah, and the funny thing is I've never even seen Twilight, but I know it know him from that. And there's a lot of mixed bag feelings on that
Well,
choice.
everybody that any Batman they announce, everybody has a fit about it. I really like Christian Bale. I like Ben Affleck and Robert Pattinson. I like all of them.
Yeah,
I really like. I wouldn't have any problem seeing any of them as Batman for the next, however many movies they make.
Truthfully, it's not the lead actor was not as much of a thing for me as much as it was not being Christopher Nolan, because I love almost every Christopher Nolan movie I've ever seen. And I'm just a Christopher Nolan nut. So to have him step away from Batman, like obviously they've been doing it already with Justice League and Batman v Superman and stuff like that, but I didn't see those because I don't care, because they're not made by Christopher Nolan. Anyway.
Well, Christopher Nolan, he is one of my favorite directors. In addition, him, Tarantino, those are like my top two. I would say Peter Jackson's number 3 easily.
Right.
But the idea that Christopher Nolan brought to the Batman was a very realistic take on it, and this almost takes another step further in the overall realism of the world. Because let's be honest, Arnold Schwarzenegger playing Mr. Freeze and Batman and Robin, that was just,
you are about to get iced.
That right there, man. I think I fell asleep like halfway through. I was just like, this is terrible.
All right. Well, last piece of in the news before we move on to tech talk, the Apple Mac Studio. So this is going to be kind of a fun conversation because, obviously I'm a PC guy. I'm a Linux guy. You're a PC guy on Windows. So neither of us use Mac in any form or fashion.
Nope.
I've used Mac a little bit, and quite frankly, it frustrated me. I'm a pretty techie guy. I build computers. Obviously, I install OSs all the time and stuff like that, and I love to tinker with them. I've got, I've got an emulation computer at home just because I wanted to play with it. But when I start playing with Macs, everything's reversed. Like Command C instead of Control Z or C, and like just the clicking and their mice, like their hardware is phenomenal. And if I were to get a Mac, truthfully, I would get a Mac just for the hardware and load a different OS on it. But the thing is, the Mac Studio that was announced. Now you haven't seen much into that.
No, I'm not a computer guy, really.
Yeah.
I'll play with a camera all day long before I even look at a computer.
Yeah. A true filmmaker, I guess. Whereas I, of course, am very into computers, and I'm also into video. But my thing with the new Mac, I think they just called it the Mac Studio.
Yeah.
They have the new M1 Max chip and the M1 Ultra chip, I think is what it was. And the M1 Ultra is like 2 Max chips put together and stuff. And the specs are incredible. Like the amount of performance that those things are getting out of them are really quite amazing if they're true. Because like a lot of things, Mac announces or Apple announces one thing, and it sounds like they might be doing something a little overpromised. And once people actually start doing the real life testing on it, they aren't going to actually live up to what Apple is promising. So the proof will be in the pudding. That's a very old sounding term. But when they actually release the Mac Studio and people can play with it and find out what it's actually capable of. For me, though, I'm not a Mac guy, so obviously I'm not going to get it. But the first computer starts at $2,000. And then they have another one with the M1 Ultra, and it's $4,000. Now, this whole SoC concept, system on a chip, where everything's integrated into one board and they only make one variation of the computer and you can upgrade RAM or whatever. But it's very Mac, for one, or very Apple. But I need to be able to put expansion cards in there. I need to be able to upgrade components over time. My CPU goes bad, I replace the CPU. And I'm on an LGA 2011 socket, and I could basically get, any CPU that's about 5 years old for like $30-$40 on eBay, and I'm back up and running. Where you got like the the Mac Studio and the iMacs and everything like that, they're not even Intel anymore. They're an actual Apple chip. Mm-hmm. And I don't know, it's funny how much more Apple is getting even more proprietary than I thought they would. Yeah. Because at least the early Mac, like the Mac Pros and stuff like that, those you could at least swap out components. You could put in, I think they even had proper PCIe ports and stuff like that. And nowadays it's all integrated. You have to use what they give you and you have no choice.
Yeah.
So for me, I know I'm pretty much the one talking about this subject because I did look into it and it looks cool. Like as far as building that computer out to make it powerful and unique and everything, it was really cool, and their cooling system is awesome. But for me, I just can't go Mac, just mainly because it's like it's overpriced for the hardware you're getting typically, and I can build a PC cheaper, and you can't swap anything out. There's no customizability.
No, like I said, I'm not really a computer guy, but I have looked at the M1, the original Mac M1, and I really just haven't had the opportunity to really sit down with a Mac and run Adobe products. I know I personally use the Adobe Creative Cloud. I know Micah, he's got DaVinci Resolve and everything like that, but I was always told, you get so much better performance out of the Creative Cloud when it's on a Mac, and I hadn't had the opportunity to really test that or to see it. I know that the PC that my brother built for me has worked for the past 3 years with basically no problems.
And you've got 64 gigs of RAM.
I do.
GTX 1080 Ti?
I don't think it's a Ti. It's just a regular 1080.
Okay, but that's still got like, what, 10 or 12 gigs of VRAM?
I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know. I know it's an i7 8700K for the CPU.
Okay.
But as far as the 1080 is concerned, I had thought about upgrading to a 3080, but the prices on those are just ridiculous.
Well, and that's the thing is like, so I built my computer on this channel. So if you guys want to see everything that's in my computer, you can go back and watch that. It was a couple of years ago. I built it for about $1,600. I only had 16 gigs of RAM in it. I've since upgraded to 48 gigs. And I know that I know before everybody chimes in that prices have gone up, and they have, and obviously chip shortage is a real problem and stuff like that. But even still, if I were to spend $4,000 to build a PC, I could get something far and above the performance of that Mac Studio, I believe. Now, of course, there's software tweaks and performance improvements and stuff like that get added. And not everything is just raw gigahertz and cache size and stuff like that. There are things that come with just better software and everything. But I use Linux. So there's some performance improvements that I get from just doing that, which Mac also runs basically a variant, not a variant of Linux, I know that, but it's Unix based and everything. So it's a very similar lightweight OS. I don't know. We can jump off this subject, but for me, the Mac Studio is just not something I'm going to go with.
No.
All right. So tech talk. We're going from computers to cameras. And this subject was brought up by you. You kind of wanted to talk about this a little bit. And I think I'm actually a little bit of a disagreer to what you're saying. And go ahead and start it off.
So one of the headline features about the GH6 is the increased dynamic range, and there's actually what it's called a dynamic range boost. Now, this particular mode is available in certain frame rates. I don't believe that you can get it above 60 frames per second. I'm not sure about that, but essentially what it does is it's very similar to how the Area Alexa gets a higher dynamic range. And what it does is it takes your base ISO up to 2000, which in daylight, sunny days, that's really not optimum, but I can always put an ND filter on there and get better exposure. But the way it does it is it takes an image and takes one image that's exposing for the shadows, one image that's exposing for the highlights, and it combines those two images together in camera and gives you a video file that basically has all this dynamic range. Now, I have seen footage out of the Area Alexa, and it is incredible what kind of dynamic range you can get. You can have a bright sunny day, take the camera from outdoors to the indoors, still capture perfect detail. in the highlights and the shadows, and it looks great. It looks phenomenal, but it's also ungraded, and something that I've seen in a number of movies from 10 years ago, movies now. There's all this talk about dynamic range boost and, you can save the highlights. You don't have to worry about clipping highlights. And don't get me wrong, I don't like clipped highlights in videos. Mm-hmm. Like when the sky is just bright white, I've shot on a 5D Mark III, okay? If we're going to talk about bad dynamic range, that is the camera that's got some really bad dynamic range. I mean, if you're on a bright sunny day with that camera shooting video, now don't get me wrong, there are different things you can tweak with the picture profiles, but it's still a very, very, very compressed video, and it's very, very low in dynamic range. So working with the images coming out of that camera, I was still able to get a great result because I knew how to place my subjects in a way where, they weren't just completely backlit. There's mm-hmm. ways that you can get around having poor dynamic range, but an even further idea that I started to formulate after I watched a number of movies is most colorists, they crank that contrast and they blow out the sky, or if there's a highlight portion on the face, it depends on what the scene is, but I've seen a number of blown highlights in feature films that are millions and millions and millions of dollars, and it's still, like, as a movie, it doesn't detract from the movie. It still looks like a movie. It looks great. It looks like cinema. And the thing that I've also often been frustrated with is this obsession with dynamic range. And now you have to get a camera with great dynamic range, and that's that's all that there is to a great image. There's so much more to a great image than just dynamic range.
I agree that there's more to a good image than dynamic range, and it's not everything. Where I disagree with you, though, is I believe the fight for dynamic range is more important than the fight for resolution. I believe it's more important than the fight for even color profiles and things like that.
Yeah.
Because when it comes down to it, if you have a log profile and you're shooting like 10-bit and you've got a good codec, the biggest thing that's going to make any improvements is dynamic range. And one of the reasons why film has lasted so long, and film is still used to this day, very fringe, I know, Christopher Nolan, him and like 2 other people. But even still, one of the reasons why there are still so many diehards after video has gotten so good for so long is mainly due to dynamic range. You can shoot outdoors and get somebody in the underneath a shaded tree, and you can see the background. It's much brighter, but then what you have actually in camera is very well framed or very well exposed, and it's just beautiful. Just the amount of depth of luminance you can get with higher dynamic ranges. So obviously neither of us is going to say stop giving me good dynamic range. Obviously we want improvements across the spectrum.
Yeah, I just wouldn't base your decision on the purchase of a camera solely on dynamic range, because let's be honest, digital cameras, they've gotten so good at this point. I mean, they've come very, very far from where they were. I mean, I think the first true 4K digital camera was the Red One. Mm-hmm. And that camera, for the price, I mean, it's terribly expensive compared to the kinds of stuff that we have now, but it really blew a lot of people out of the water. And with all the advancements that we've had, we have great cameras. I mean, the GH4 being one of them, you get a great 4K image straight out of camera that people were comparing against the Red and the Arri Alexas. And I think at that point, I don't think Arri Alexa even made a 4K camera. I think it was just...
They only came out with a 4K camera, what was it? 4 or 5 years ago?
Yeah, it's been recent.
Yeah.
It's been recent. And the GH4, it's an old boy. It's an old camera, but I've been using it at my weddings recently. And, people, they complain about the low light performance. And no, it doesn't have great low light performance, but I get a great image out of that camera. And I know that film and digital video will get to a point where it will be indistinguishable, especially when it comes to the lower end cameras like the GH5S. I mean, if you put it up against an Arri Alexa is going to win in the dynamic range. It just is. But film, as of right now, is still a really awesome standard to be able to use, and I'd love the opportunity to shoot on an actual film camera.
Yeah. Oh, I would too. And there's some ways you can do it. It can be expensive. It's definitely expensive when you compare it to how easy it is to shoot on video.
Oh, yeah.
Once you get video, you got to just pay for, the charge of the batteries and then maybe an SD card or two when they go bad. That's all you have to pay for. So we're spoiled on that front. But no, I think we both agree on, it's never bad to get more dynamic range and stuff like that. Where I disagree, though, is pretty much I will go for a newer, more expensive camera just to get the better dynamic range. And that's mainly my point on this.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's also, like, it's not just Red and Arri Alexa. You got Blackmagic with the Ursa Mini G2, the Ursa Mini 12K. I mean, you really cannot get anything better for the money.
Yeah.
Like, there's just nothing out there. And I've often thought about getting even the original Ursa. Like the original Ursa was a massive camera. I mean, it was gigantic. It had a giant 10-inch display on it.
Yeah.
It was like the, as far as impractical goes, like having to haul around one of those things on set would be a nightmare. Not to mention they were so power hungry. And
it did not last long. They only had that camera in production for, I think it was under a year. It might have been a year and a half or something upwards of that, but it was not long because as soon as they had introduced that Ursa Mini, everybody jumped for that because it basically had the same specs at half the size and half the cost. I mean, part of me, though, still wants an original Ursa just because, I don't know, there's something beautiful about the restrictions that a big camera gives you. You look at old movies and stuff like that Hitchcock was making and everything in the day, and those cameras were the size of a car. You had to sit it somewhere and point it, and dedicate yourself to a specific angle and a specific shot. And you had to really think about it before you did it. And one thing that it is really great how small our cameras and capable our cameras have gotten. But the truth is, in some ways, it's also been a bad thing because there's often the term true creativity lives within restrictions or lives within a box. And I think that that's very true when it comes to you're forced to take a moment, think about it. Where am I going to put this camera? How am I going to rig it? And what am I actually going to try to do to tell this story? And little cameras, you can just whip them around, do whatever you want. And in many ways, it becomes sloppy. And that's kind of my thing. But it's also just fun having a big camera,
Oh, well, I mean, I had considered getting one. In fact, I believe that Blackmagic had introduced, not only was it a global shutter, but it was also a global shutter with a 4K image that could shoot up to 90 frames per second. Now, I should stress, they only had it in production for a year. So there's very few of these that are on the market. And now there's test footage on YouTube showing the 4K at 90 frames per second. But those people that got a hold of those cameras, it's just a handful.
Yeah.
And I looked for one for a long time, and I could never find one. I couldn't find on eBay or anything like that. And I always thought about the ramifications of, well, I have this giant camera. Now I have to get a giant tripod.
Yeah.
Now I actually have a camera that I can fly on a Steadicam and do all sorts of crazy stuff with that.
This is a good point from a comment. People think the bigger the camera, the more professional you are.
Oh yeah.
And I get that a lot because you show up to a location, you show up with like a DSLR or something like that, and they're like, oh, I have one of those at home in my closet or something like that. Of course, nobody knows the difference between a T3i and a GH6, but you show up with like a cinema rig or something like that, and they're like, whoa, this is legit. I'm glad I paid money for this.
Oh yeah, no, don't get me wrong. There's a real thing when it comes to stuff like that, and I've seen people, they'll rig out a GH4, they'll rig out a Zcam E2. There's all of this hardware out there that you can add to these cameras to give them the functionality of a full-fledged cinema camera. Now, I've been in a really sort of an odd position because I grew up, I literally, my first digital camera was a T3i.
Yeah.
That was the very first one that I used. Then I started working with a 5D Mark III, and I'm so accustomed to that form factor that anything outside of a DSLR is foreign to me. And even like I did own a Pocket 4K at one time, and I had it all rigged out, and I was able to get some really great images on it. But I still really, I'm spoiled by the form factor of a mirrorless camera. And when we were shooting my feature film, there's I would say at least 60% of it is all shot on a GH5S. The other 40% was shot on a Pocket 4K, but and there's been so many rumors about the sensors themselves. The sensors, I think they're the same sensor, honestly.
On the
Pocket 4K and the GH5S. I think it's a very but they've obviously changed, a number of factors, because I know the Pocket 4K is a dual native ISO, so is the GH5S dual native ISO.
This is kind of an old one, but I mean, most sensors are made by Sony.
Yes, they are. Yeah.
And it's kind of like, Samsung, they make most displays, so you can go on and on about like one looks crisper, one looks cleaner. And that really just comes down to the tweaks. So you get the sensor, but then what are the components behind it?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, but speaking of like, the cost of the cameras and all that kind of stuff, and that kind of brings us to another point of charging, clients and all that kind of stuff. Much of like what we do is for fun. It's making the movies and stuff like that. But you have a business, wedding videography and some commercial videography and stuff like that. And I now own a company which does all commercial videography and stuff. And so, I mean, I'm sure for many of you, this will be a topic that's not necessarily too important or too crazy, but you got to charge for your product.
You got to make
money.
And
this is kind of a problem I've been having even within the last week or so, is you get a lot of people who will do work for next to nothing, and then they run out all the other people who are trying to make a living because nobody else wants to pay for that product. And it's great that you're charging cheaper than everybody else, sure, but your product ends up being crap anyway, because you go out there and you're not actually creating something and spending the time to craft a product that's good. And like we're talking about this, all this equipment and gear and everything, and everybody, I hear this argument all the time about, well, I could do that with my iPhone or something like that. The truth is, no, you can't. The compression is a very real thing. You can't tweak the colors. But then beyond that, there's also the skill level. And people will pay a lot of money for nice, expensive paintings. You can buy those brushes for a couple $100, and the paints for a few $100 beyond that and stuff like that. Because when you get up to that level, obviously you're paying a lot of money for it. But then everybody, it's like, well, I've got those paints at home. My kid does that at school, and everything like that.
Yeah.
You look at some Picasso, I would kind of agree with you. But when it comes down to it, this laptop I bought for $500 used, and it was an older laptop, but that's $500 right there. This board, about $200. This ATEM switcher, about $500. My computer, about $600 or $1,600. My monitors were at least $250 to $300 a piece. My Blackmagic Pocket 4K was $1,300. The cage that it sits in is about $120. And then I've got my recording media, which goes up to at least $500 or more. I've got my lighting, which costs me $400, $500, $600. I've got, even just the mileage and everything. But then, of course, beyond all of that is the fact that I've spent 15 years of my life learning my craft and how to make these projects and how to make a good product. So don't tell me I'm going to go get it from somebody for $150, like my cousin or something like that, because they're not going to do you a good job. Because beyond even just crafting a visually interesting image, there's also the fact of telling a brand or telling something for your brand that is impactful and gets the message across. I've spent years in television and everything like that, learning how to tell a story and convey the message of your brand and your business to people effectively and elegantly over 30 seconds of time, which is not much time. And you're not going to go get that from somebody for free or for $150, $200.
No, not going to happen.
And so beyond the thousands and thousands of dollars I have in equipment and you have in equipment and all these other people have in equipment, it's not just the equipment, it's also your experience. But the equipment is reason enough to say, no, I need to charge more. If you're in business and you're doing commercial video production, you're making commercials, even if you're shooting wedding videography and things like that, don't charge nothing. value your product, value what you do, and go out there, put it in front of people and say your rate, and don't be ashamed that it costs you a little bit of money.
Oh yeah. I mean, the worst thing you could possibly do, because discussion has come up. I mean, it's across the board with commercial video, wedding video, photography, all that sort of stuff. When your rate is your rate, and then you have a client that comes back and says, "Oh well, I can't do that. Can you do a little less?" Like there's the argument to be made. Well, it's better to make something than nothing at all. But the reality is that if you tell them your rate and then they come to you and they say, "I can't do that. Can you do something lower?" and then you lower your rate, well, you technically just lie to them the first time.
Mm-hmm.
So the only thing that they're going to think about when they walk away from that meeting after you've given them the new rate or the lower rate is they're going to think, well, maybe I could have gotten it even lower.
Yeah.
Because like if you're going to go, $300 off, $500 off, however much you're going to take off the price, the only thing they're going to think is how much more they could have gotten, how much cheaper they could have gotten it.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I will say, and from the perspective of wedding videography versus commercial videography, weddings, you have a lot of emotion in the day. This is not something that is going to be on a company website that they paid X amount of dollars. This is something that this girl has been dreaming about for however long.
Sure.
Not only has she been dreaming about it, but she's been planning it, envisioning in her mind how she wanted it to go. All of these different things. There's so much tied into that. And so when you're creating a wedding video, you do get sort of I wouldn't say a free pass, but when you're showing them or when they're watching it, they're remembering all of the things that happened throughout that day. Whereas with commercial video, you have to especially be in tune with not only the company, but the product that the company is selling and all of these things, because what you have to do is you have to evoke an emotion from the potential customer that's watching the ad,
Mm-hmm.
so that they will feel compelled to go and get this product for the company. Because the whole point of it is you're trying to get more people to buy this product with the video.
Well, and that's something we were talking about earlier on today. And this is kind of a hot button topic for me. So that's why I'm a little on edge with it. So I apologize. But we were talking about this a little bit earlier today is, I do a lot of different commercial videography. It'll be training videos for companies so that when they bring on new employees, they know how to do their job within about 10 minutes or so of watching a video. I also do things like actual product showcases where we, for instance, I work with a boat manufacturer. We go out to the river, we shoot their boats on the water, and it just kind of makes their boat look cool, and they can keep it on their website and everything to demonstrate their product. But then the other thing, of course, is like 30-second TV commercials and social media commercials and things like that, or OTT. And one of my jobs, and this is a very important job, and one of my jobs is to take the corporate mindset away. One of my jobs is to go, you're thinking about dollars and cents. The customer doesn't give a darn about that. What you need your customer to do is say, I don't care how much that costs. I'm going to go invest in that product, or I think that you're trustworthy enough to give, to ask to be a service provider for me. That's your job, to make them feel something about the product. And one of the things that I'm talking about is, like, for instance, like back to charging a little bit. Look at Nike. They have got the most simplistic logo in the world. How much did it cost them to make? I guarantee you it wasn't $150. Whereas I could go into Inkscape right now and make that logo just as good as you often see it in most cases. But it's a value piece for the company. And there's a lot of research. There's also a lot of people who knew why they needed to make the logo the way they were making it. And that's why something like even Apple, Nike, all these other places that have all these logos that are very simplistic should not be asking to get a logo for $150. Same thing with video. We're coming in here, we're providing a product that has a lot of consideration behind it, years of experience of how to craft a product. We should not be charging people a very small amount of money. And I stick to your guns, because, for instance, I just actually earlier on today had to get off the phone with somebody who I had pitched an entire basically contract to, where my company would handle commercial videography for them for a certain amount of rates per day and all this kind of stuff. And they said, we just can't do it. And I was like, I understand, but those are my rates and I'm moving on. And you have to say no to people, because as soon as you say, I'll do it for less, now the next person is going to have to underbid you. And then once they underbid you, you've got to underbid them. And it's going to be a continually falling spiral to where now nobody's paying anything for work and none of us can make a living. So stick to your guns, charge how much you charge. That's pretty much what that comes down to for me.
Amen.
All right. Hot button topic, I know. And if you got anything further on that, please drop it in the live chat. We'd love to talk about it more. And if you're watching this after the fact, please drop a comment below. And I'm pretty active in the comment section, so I would love to talk about it with you more. All right. So woes of the week is the next segment of this podcast or broadcast. We're not exactly on a legitimate podcast feed yet, but that will eventually happen, hopefully. For you, it is Shadow of Death.
Shadow of Death.
Tell me a little bit more about this.
Okay, so Shadow of Death is a short film that I've thought a lot about it recently, and it never got released, and there's a very, very good reason why that it never saw the light of day. It was actually a remake of another short that I had done about 3 or 4 years previous. And I'm not going to get into the story. I'm not going to get into all the details or specifics of it. But what I will say is when it comes to, producing, editing, making a short, making any form of narrative content, you're going to have those 1 or 2 projects that you're just going to want, you just wish never happened. That you wish that you'd have done something different, or, it's always like that. And this is one of those projects for me. And I wanted to talk about it because it really changed a lot of how I think about my work in general. And a lot of this stems from the fact that I'm first before anything else, I am a wedding videographer. That is what I do almost every weekend. Sometimes in the past, it's been 8 weekends in a row. It's just wedding. Mm-hmm. So when you're trying to make that jump from doing,
you got to make the plug though. Steve Frank Films.
Look
it up.
Steve Frank Films. That's our company. If you're trying to make that jump from wedding videography into narrative work, there's a couple things that I was having issues with that I needed to overcome. First of all, I needed to have a decent script. Mm. And historically speaking, I had very little luck with coming up with anything that I even liked. It wasn't even a matter if someone else would watch it. I was not satisfied with the stories, with the way that the story flowed, the characters. I was just very dissatisfied with it. So most of the stuff that I ever wrote, I would write it, read it, and delete it.
Yeah.
that's the majority of it.
Yeah.
I mean, but before we didn't even get into the production stage, I would just be so dissatisfied with it. And so Shadow of Death was one of the very first things that I wrote that I didn't hate.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't, it wasn't a low, I love this, I like this. It was like, I don't hate it. It's okay. Like, this isn't like the worst thing that I've ever seen.
Which is not bad, because there's a lot of people going around who love to say, and I get the argument, basically you should hate your work more than anybody else, But when you get to a point where you actually can say, I don't hate this, I don't think that's a bad sign.
No, it's not. I mean, it's a good sign. And as I said, there's always one or 2 projects you're going to have that you just sort of wish you'd have done things different. This is one of those projects. So to give you a little bit of context, I had watched Alan Sorkin's Masterclass.
Mm-hmm.
I paid $100. I watched it. It was all about screenplays and coming up with ideas and all that. And I was so excited about getting to work on a screenplay that I pretty much forgot everything that he had talked about in the masterclass. Like when I look at the script and I think about the masterclass, I was like, I genuinely just ignored everything that he said.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll go over a few of those pointers. I would very highly recommend you watching that masterclass if you're wanting to learn how to do actual like screenplays and that sort of thing for film. But what I took from the film, first of all, it was about 20 minutes long. It was a 20-minute short film, and there was some dialogue, but the biggest issue with the short film was, and this is something that helped me greatly, the audience has to know. They have to know what it's about, what the motivation behind the main character is. They have to know those two things first. It has to know. It has to happen as soon as possible, because the sooner it happens, the sooner they can actually become invested in it and actually start to relate themselves to it, to relate to the story, to relate what's going on, and to become invested in it. The problem with the Shadow of Death is that didn't happen until 15 minutes into the short, almost at the end. Now,
and this is a short film, mind you, not feature.
Yes, no, this is a short film, and see, you don't have the luxury that you have of a feature film. A feature film, you go into, hour and 45, 2 hours, and in the Batman's case, it's actually a 3-hour movie, but it doesn't feel that way, and it's because very, very, very early on, they perfectly lay out the inciting incident, which is what it's called. It's the problem that the main character has to solve, that sort of thing. They do that like very first thing in the Batman, and that's the rule.
Oh, it's the hero's journey.
Exactly. You have to do that, and I tried to do it in Shadow of Death, but it didn't pan out in such a way. And for the record, I'll just say the way that I did it, it really could not count as the inciting incident at all, because the audience has to know what's happening. And I was trying to do something that Christopher Nolan has done before. For instance, Tenet. For those of you who haven't seen it, please go watch it. Okay?
Great movie.
Now, I am going to talk about some stuff that happens. We don't really know anything about the main character. Like, we don't know where he's from. We don't know if he's married. We don't know if he has kids. We don't really know any of that. But the thing is, we don't really have to know it, because the movie is not about the main character. The movie is about Tenet.
Right.
And it's about this new technology that allows people to go back in time. And the main character's job is to figure out, how is this possible? Who's doing this? And all sort of stuff like that. But the focus is on this new technology. That's the drive.
Well, it is the main character technically.
Exactly. And that's the plot of the whole movie. And so the audience automatically, like right off the bat, with that very first scene, immediately hooks you, and you're like, okay, what's going on here?
Yeah.
There's things that I've seen in that movie that I genuinely just I can't comprehend how they filmed it.
Yeah.
Like there's people moving in real time, and then there's people walking backwards, and it's
I've seen behind the scenes on that movie, and I thought that like acting in reverse was complicated, but then they took it to another level, and it's messed up. But so Weekly Woes, obviously there's a new format that we're doing and everything like that, and Weekly Woes is basically one of the things we're thinking about throughout the week, and for some of it, it'll be pretty current stuff that we're dealing with, but then also the moral of the lesson and how we deal with it. So my question is, Shadow of Death, what's the moral of the story? What did you learn from this?
Well, the moral of the story is that you should not ignore the instruction you've been given. You should follow it as best as you possibly can, and then learn from it. So at the end of Shadow of Death, I had realized, and it took me a little bit, because at first I was so excited about it, and I thought it was great. I thought it was brilliant. But then I started to let very close friends, people that I trusted, to watch it and to really just accurately critique it and give me feedback. Like, what is this? Do you like it? And the overwhelming majority was, this is terrible. Like, you should not like this. I told him, I said, listen, compare this to Jurassic World. Like compare this. Don't just compare this to
a good movie.
Yeah. Compare it to what Hollywood's doing. Compare it to something that has multi-millions of dollars.
Right.
And it did not meet that standard, and it's for obvious reasons. And so all I could say to any of you, if you're going to write a script, I encourage you, write scripts as much as you can. I mean, I've written feature film scripts that took me 2 years to make that I deleted at the end of it.
Yeah.
Like, and it didn't get past that stage. But you need to do that in order to learn what works and what doesn't. And when you've written a 100-page script and you have your brother come in and after 13 pages says, "Hey, this is unreadable. You should not do this." Mm-hmm. Okay, that's what's gonna make you learn.
Yeah,
and it's really hard. It really sucks.
It does.
It's really, really awful, but you have to have that happen in order to make something better. And that's where ultimately Rancor, the film that I'm working on, comes from, because
this is a feature film now.
It is a feature film. It did start as a short film, though, and this short film is the very next thing that I worked on after Shadow of Death. And when I showed it to my friends as a short film, they said, "Listen, this just makes Shadow of Death look like child's play. Like, this really outshines it in so many ways. It's so much better." And but I had to make Shadow of Death in order to get to where I made something people actually enjoyed. And with that, I decided, well, you know what? It's a great short film. Let's turn it into a feature.
Yeah.
And that's where it all turned out great.
That's awesome. And it's kind of like some people, or I've heard the term, I forget exactly how it goes, but it's something like you have to get through a lot of crap before you can get to the good stuff, basically, is what it comes down to.
Yeah.
You know, and we've all been there. And,
yeah, exactly.
And I'm still there. I need to get some stuff back into working order. But my woe of the week will come to you after this message from our sponsor, the Premier Prep Filmmakers Group. The Premier Prep Filmmakers Group is on Facebook and live now, so make sure you go there, join the group, and start filmmaking conversations. It's all about filmmaking. That's all the group is meant to be about. And you'll get updates about what's happening here, of course, on the Premier Prep Facebook page. But the Premier Prep Filmmakers Group is for all of us to talk and for all of us to start these conversations. So go on over there, join the Facebook group, and let's start talking. It'll be a lot of fun. Okay, so my woe of the week is very adult sounding. Taxes. Basically, my moral of the story comes down to research companies before you commit to using them.
Before you sign over very, very important information.
Yes. So just before I get into it, it's not like I've got anything super bad happening. It's a lot of headache and frustration, mainly just for the fact that now I have to transfer all of my tax data over to something new, and they have to refile everything and stuff like that. And I come to you as this, it's filmmaking related, because if you're a filmmaker professionally, obviously you have to deal with taxes, and our taxes can be kind of complicated because, I mean, we have to deal with a lot of deductions. We have to deal with a lot of, like, you know, business purchases and stuff like that. It's things that a lot of people don't normally have to deal with. But when I formed my company, I made it an LLC, and we can talk more about this later on eventually. But I made it an LLC, and I, in the process, was using an online service that files for your LLC, gets you all set up, gets your articles of organization put together, everything. And it was a great service. I cannot recommend it enough. But I will not name its name at the moment, just for certain reasons. But the thing is they suggested going with a certain company to do my bookkeeping. And I'm like, okay, I'm a new company. I definitely do not want to take care of all this myself, because when it comes to all that, I'm a filmmaker. I do video production. I do, graphic design is another part of what I do and everything. And I am not comfortable handling my taxes right now, so I'll give it a shot. It's ending badly. They were asking me for things that I had already given them. They had already filed. I'd even paid extra money to have a dedicated bookkeeper, all kinds of stuff, and they did not do their job. So I finally pulled, and I went to the classical QuickBooks, and now they're pulling all of my information, and it's just a nightmare. But the moral of my story, and I'm trying to keep it a little bit more brief for my woes of the week.
Sorry.
No. You are perfectly good. People would rather hear about Shadow of Death than taxes.
Oh, well.
So, yeah. But basically what it comes down to is if you are a video production business owner or graphic designer or anything like that, it's probably going to be better for you to have a bookkeeping company or something that can help you keep all of that better together. But research things, because come to find out, they had like a 2.5-star review on Yelp. They had like a 3-star review on Facebook and all kinds of other stuff. So it was not a good company. That was my bad lesson learned. And I want you guys to learn that lesson from my mistake. And it's just causing me a lot of headache. Luckily, nothing too catastrophic or anything. It's just a lot of like sorting through files that I've already had to deal with. I got to find all my old PDF scans of receipts and stuff like that. And now we're just having to go through all of my taxes again because of that problem. So if you guys are business owners or looking at being business owners, definitely go through something like getting your LLC or something like that. But just definitely research who's doing your bookkeeping. Okay, so the last segment of this episode is movie suggestion of the week. I used to do this back when I had Film World News. And I think I did a couple of live streams where I was doing movie suggestion of the week. So that was a lot of fun. I wanted to bring it back for you guys. And Jesse, you have a movie suggestion.
What was it? I can't remember. Hang on. Let me look at it real quick. Let's see. What did I put down there?
And little...
The Batman. Go see The Batman.
Yep.
Please go see The Batman.
It sounds really good. Batman's the only DC character I like. I'll just say that. I'm not a big fan of many other characters that are from DC.
I mean, I like Wonder Woman, but I just, she's hot. That's why I like her. I mean, don't get me wrong. The movie's great, too. I like the movie.
I never saw it. I'm so not into DC that I'm not really even going to invest the time to go watch their movies. Like, I've also been superheroed out. Marvel's been doing so much, and it's gone way down the tubes.
But Spider-Man,
into this, or
not far from home, or No Way Home.
No Way Home.
Yes,
that was amazing.
Yes.
And I was like a kid in a candy store in that movie theater.
I did not expect that to be what it was, and that was more.
See,
that was just
Tobey Maguire is my Spider-Man.
Yeah,
he will always be my Spider-Man. But Andrew Garfield showed up first. Spoiler alert. It's been out for a long time. If you haven't seen it, it's your fault. But when Andrew Garfield showed up, he showed up first, and I just lost it in the movie theater. I started cheering. I actually just about got out of my seat and started applauding because it was just like nostalgia. But then when Tobey Maguire showed up, that was it for me. Yeah. But no, it was a really good movie. But yeah, the Batman looks really good as well. So good movie suggestion. Go watch that. My movie suggestion of the week has been out for a few years, and it's right behind me. It is Ford versus Ferrari. I don't think I suggested that ever in the past. It's been so long since I've done a movie suggestion of the week that I'm just going to use it. But no, Ford versus Ferrari is an incredible movie. It's about the 66 Le Mans and the battle between Ford with their GT40 and Ferrari with their absolute dominance in the 24 Hours of Le Mans. And it is an incredible movie. I'm a racing fan. I love cars. I love racing in general. And this movie does not disappoint. It is... Fast and Furious was interesting with movie 1 and 2, and I at least watched up until, Paul Walker left. But Ford versus Ferrari is the kind of car movie that you just can't make enough of.
Well, it's a car movie, and it's not like the thing that I always look for, because I wouldn't call myself a car guy necessarily.
Yes, you are.
Well, I am and I'm not, because there's a lot of things that I do know and there's a lot of things that I don't know. Like
you're a car guy. You're not a mechanic.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. But the thing that does the challenge that presents itself with a movie like Ford vs. Ferrari is you have to be able to not only tell a story, but there are certain technical aspects to a car movie that general audiences just aren't going to know about. Like there's like brake pads, calipers,
drafting.
These different things. But this movie did a great job in telling you the story, but still having enough technical information that someone who was on the outs on cars would still be able to enjoy it. Whereas when they did mention a technical aspect of the film that I understood, I was like, oh, well that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. Well, and the only thing I didn't like about the movie is they beat up on Chevy a little bit, and I'm a bit of a Chevy guy. But even still, and it's even got Ford in the name, so technically I should be completely against this movie, but it's so good. Highly recommend you check it out. Great acting, great story. The soundtrack is unreal.
Yeah, it's good.
But that's my movie suggestion of the week. We are a little bit over an hour. Kind of the target for these podcasts going forward is about an hour. I'm your host, Micah Pendleton. This has been Jesse Frank with me as co-host.
Assistant to the co-host. Or assistant to the host.
Yeah, let me see. Let's bring up that CG again. But the thing is, we are going to be doing these a lot more, especially with running a business and everything. It's a lot more easy for us to do. And it's also better for us to get you guys out just some good, consistent content. Also, it's not going to always be just me and Jesse. I've also got Shantae Stevens, who's going to be on the show in the future. Cannot wait to have her on. She's a great video producer that works with me at Caution Glass is the name of my company, by the way. Go check it out, cautionglass.com. And it's going to be awesome to having bringing people in and getting their take on filmmaking and everything and video production as a whole. So I look forward to more of these with you guys. Thank you so much for watching. And again, I'm so glad that Premiere Prep is back. I cannot thank you enough for tuning in. But definitely go join that Premiere Prep Filmmakers or Premiere Prep Filmmakers. I know the name of the group on Facebook. And let's start some chatting and let's get back into Premiere Prep being a thing. And thank you guys so much for watching. We've had some great live viewers here today, and I really appreciate you guys tuning in. And thank you so much to Jesse for being here.
Well, thank you for having me.
And because this was a rush show today, because we have had very busy work weeks, we're going to go back to the standby for broadcast slate because I don't have an end of broadcast slate.
Ah.
Yeah, so we will tune out and we will see you guys next time.